So we're going to go ahead and look at Levik's player information here. Talk about Levik because he is going to be in our first matchup versus Hemlock here. But Levik was our first champion. So let's switch over and look at some of these replays on how Levik got to this point here. We definitely see a couple of classes that have already been talked about. We've talked about Levik. We've talked about some of these decks. We saw there was some Demon Hunter. I know Edelweiss was mentioning Demon Hunter before we got into the broadcast, but let's take a look even more in depth at Levik and look at some of the information. The lineup here for Levik is this Plague Death Knight, this kind of dragon druid, this demon hunter that we're kind of calling this aggro demon hunter, and showdown paladin, which of course is definitely been banned. But what do you think of this lineup and of Levik overall here, Edelweiss?
Yeah, it's an unusual lineup. I think, Subtle and I have agreed that you and Meaty and Pocket's lineups look the best, and that's because some of these lineups just really have us scratching our heads, such as this Dragon Druid out of Levik, which has quite a few duplicates. I did manage to play a bit with it, and if we see it later on, I will go through some of what I think is the intended strategy with getting rid of those duplicates, but yeah, I was seeing here as well, Levik, one of only a couple of Plague Decays. I don't know if people were expecting more Highlander decks. It is, of course, kind of funny when you bring Plague Decay to deal with Highlander decks, and they, of course, just have duplicates in the list themselves, so we'll see how that pans out. I really like, though, in this particular list, Levik's brought in the Flint Firearm, which got buffed recently, and that is a very fun card to play, so maybe we'll see some impact of that today.
Yeah, the Plague Decay is definitely a very interesting one. I'm looking forward to talking about that one because it's kind of, as you mentioned, one of the only few that we have. But we're going to get into that a little bit later because we also have, on the other side, the opponent here with Hemlock. Now, let's talk about Hemlock a little bit more here, who we're going to be seeing. And again, his path getting here, you see him actually playing against Levik and closing out a game there against Levik in a previous tournament, in a previous series. So maybe Hemlock looking to repeat that and hopefully, get the whole sweep potentially, or get just, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. We saw 3-1 in the first series. We're not sure here, but again, the Showdown Paladin also coming into these lineups for all of these players, but being banned out, and Hemlock also bringing in that aggro DH. But the other two decks are a little bit different here. So we're going to take a look at that Nature Shaman, which I know Raven and Sottle hit on a lot in that first matchup, but also the Rainbow DK. This is another really interesting one, Edelweiss, that we've seen a lot over these last few tournaments. We've seen a lot throughout the year, just as we have with the Nature Shaman and this Miracle Salesman specifically kind of coming in as a card that really is kind of pivotal to a lot of these decks that we're seeing. We're going to talk about it in DH. I know Raven and Sottle talked about it a lot with that Nature Shaman, and it's appearing here in this Rainbow Mage as well.
Yeah, Rainbow Mage has gotten a lot more aggressive starts between Miracle Salesman. No Train Operator in this list. Sometimes people include that as a quick way of getting a fell spell. But regardless, I mean, you see the Mage can just do a whole bunch of stuff early on. Drop an Artificer, a Worm, Salesman, Geyser. Like, they just sort of play a bunch of junk in the early game and somehow get that chip damage in. I've noticed a lot more often recently that the mages are not always doing these big 30 damage turns anymore. They get that chip damage in and then really are hitting you for 18 to 25 or something with the Sif later on.
Yeah, and that Salesman providing a 0 mana spell to add to that damage is definitely fantastic. Unfortunately, I guess, unfortunately, we'll say it doesn't actually have a spell school of itself, but I think that would be just absolutely too powerful if it did have a spell school. But who do you feel like is favored going into this match as they get ready to jump into game number 1?
So I would probably throw my weight behind Hemlock, just because, I mean, Hemlock has made it into the playoffs of every single event, just really has shown that consistency. And I don't have faith in a couple of these lists from Levik. The Plague DK and the Dragon Druid both have me a little bit nervous. So we shall see. And quick update, it would seem that while Levik's Paladin is banned, Hemlock's Shaman is actually the ban here.
That
so
is
we may
right.
actually see a Paladin game.
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of us are expecting, I know a lot of us behind the scenes, the whole like casting crew kind of has talked about the fact that we've really expected bans just kind of across the board for Paladin. Yeah, we do have a little bit of a change up here with that Shaman getting to actually be banned, that Nature Shaman. Pretty interesting decision there, and the Paladin here we will get to see. I know it has been very, very strong across a lot of ladder games, a lot of play for these players, and we're going to see if Hemlock can get a swift win with it and get to lead off in this very vital first game in these group stages with this. That Showdown in hand, one of the new cards that's really been providing a lot of different play options for these Paladin decks. Right? The Showdown can be used to get on board early against the kind of other aggressive decks. You can use it in combination with the Prismatic Beam for incredible removal, which is something that Paladin has not always had as a strong suit. Do you think that the Showdown is actually going to be something important here in this matchup against the Plague DK from Levik?
So Showdown it's a very versatile card, but when it's just on its own like this, it's really awkward. You really got to combo it with either Beam or sometimes even a Keeper's Strength. A play you can make is to use the Showdown on 6 mana, trade the 3/3 rushes into something that's a little bit bigger on the opponent's board, and then use Keeper's Strength to kind of just clear the way. And there it is. Prismatic Beam is, I think the go-to way of actually getting to play Showdown. So you get to keep your own 3/3s and clear away theirs. But I think it's just enough mana to do that this turn.
Yeah. The kind of interesting thing here as well for Hemlock is looking at this. If he decides to go for it, which honestly it feels likely because the rest of the hand is just so clunky here. There's not a lot of options, and this is not, I think, the hand that is typical of the Paladin games that we're used to seeing. This is very slow, it's very clunky, and not what Hemlock wants. If he does go for the Showdown Prismatic, it's only going to be dealing 3 damage to everything on the other side, which does mean he'll have to send one of those 1/1s into the Helia if he wants to have kind of that clean trade, or he can just use one of the rushers on the board and keep one of the 1/1s to send to face to push an additional damage. But I like the option here of just sending in the smaller thing, keeping more on board, especially against a deck like Plague DK, because there's really only one removal option for big wide boards. And unfortunately for Hemlock, Levik has that exact answer with that Tomb Trader in hand.
I think that's really what the hesitation came down to, is that as a Paladin, Plague DK is going to be looking to keep the Tomb Trader in their opener, and this Living Horizon just is very awkward to play if you have thrown down 2 cards on that last turn. So I think Hemlock was kind of weighing the options of, well, do I risk my next turn being just hero power, Or do I take a little bit worse turn 4 so that I can get Living Horizon down? Can always do the showdown play later. Once Living Horizon is down, then Tier starts looking a little bit appealing. And I think Hemlock just decided, hey, one of the turns is going to be awkward no matter what. And if the Tomb Trader isn't there, I might just win. So, bit of a risk reward and recovery afterwards.
I completely agree with you as well there. It's that give and take, especially with these more aggressive decks, right? Sometimes you just kind of have to make the play. And I think as well with the context of Hemlock's hand just being so expensive, he really just kind of hedged the bet there that, hey, I am going to try to make that board, get out, and just kind of hope that Levik doesn't have it. And if he does, I'm forcing him to have it at that point. But being able to at least get the counters down on curve here, not the most aggressive wide board kind of paladin play that this Hemlock is looking for in any of these matchups, but with this deck specifically. But on the other side, Levik has actually been able to start piecing together this wider board. And that Reska is incredibly discounted now because this is a matchup where there has been so many minions that have been able to die because of Levik getting on board, Hemlock clearing that board with the showdown and that prismatic beam, and then Levik being able to make trades, take advantage of that hero power. And even though Hemlock has been able to now take this Countess, is starting to generate these legendaries, which aren't doing a ton of work for him yet.
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 The operative word there being yet, because we just saw two of the most insane picks that aren't, something for right now. But Lady Sitheno, Lady Sitheno can be an OTK, as can Alakir. I don't think you necessarily want two Sithenos, but being able to just throw down some pressure for a little bit to recover, and then, force Levik to use something like a Reska, and then reload with Sitheno and Garden's Grace. The only problem is those Garden's Graces aren't discounted at all yet. Once you play the first one, the second one is always going to be free. And Hemlock just opting to... Is this going to burn a card? Yeah.
Yeah, it will. But even though there's going to be a card burned, I do think that Hemlock has some really great tools in hand right now. I'm looking specifically at this deputization aura, along with things like this Alakir or the Lady Stheno that he picked up as well. But on the other side, though, Levik getting that Primus, being able to put out these reborn taunts is an incredibly impactful board presence now for Levik. And this has been such a weird game. This is like the opposite, I think, of what we would have originally expected this matchup to look like, where we would think the Paladin would be the one to be able to get on board, to be pushing this early pressure. And Hemlock hasn't even done a single point of damage yet to Levik.
But this is a thing that can happen with these pure Paladins, is like you get your early pressure dealt with, and in Hemlock's case, there was no Boogie Down or any of these other early cards that you usually expect, but Countess has just provided sort of combo options, such that I think what he's really going to try and end on is just Alakir double Garden's Grace. And so using the Sitheno here with Keeper's Strength to clear up a bit, Deputization Aura will gain back some life and finish off the Titan here. We play these other free cards into Draka, start getting that damage down. And now, even though Levik has sort of an additional clear that's not always available to Plague DKs in this Yogg Titan plus Reska, there's just massive damage from Alakir double Garden's Grace next turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the other side, though, for Levik, is the Yogg the answer? Because the Reska is completely discounted at this point. There's a 4-mana chained that you could use to rush in, and there's actually some decent bodies on the other side that you can trade into. There's unfortunately not as much leeway with maybe playing everything that Levik wants to go for here. Because he is only at 9 mana, I'm looking at things like capitalizing on the Sylvanas with potentially the Chained as well. But there's options, but Levik's just going to go for the Yogg. And there is a chance in some of these boards that not everything actually gets cleared, as well as when the mechs attack here, they're actually dealing additional damage. So not everything getting fully cleared. But again, Levik has this Reska that is 0 mana at this point. Very, very good utility tool to just bring in at the end of the turn. But as you mentioned, the Garden's Grace, just so good. So much damage.
Titan as well, were it not necessary. None of the damage before needed. Didn't even need the Draka weapon. Just an OTK here with Alakir, Double Garden's Grace, and of course the Deputization Aura. So this is the strength of Paladin, you know, even if you are willing to leave it up, feel like you could be kind of strong against its regular game plan, there's still the Countess high rolls that you just can't really be prepared for.
Yeah. And, you know, in these conquest settings as well, it doesn't matter how good it is or how much it high rolls. You just needed to do it once, and that's good enough. So that's, I think, going to be a storyline, as Raven and Subtle were talking about in that first series with that Nature Shaman, which is banned out in this matchup for Hemlock. But okay, get that quick early win with the Paladin, get that out of the way, say, yep, the good deck's doing the good things. We're going to get that win on the board, and leaves him a little bit more room to kind of sit back, breathe. He's got that first game under his belt. And now going into this second game, how do you feel about his chances here with the other two decks, with this Mage and the Demon Hunter?
So the Mage seems like it has been sort of the target of some people's lineups in this event. Certainly Q's lineup with the full aggro is very targeted against Mage. And I don't know how Death Knight necessarily performs against it, but certainly Naga DH can get under, and Nature Shaman can, or sorry, not Nature, the Dragon Druid can just present too many stats too quickly. That being said, this Dragon Druid is a little bit differently. I mean, it's the fake Reno version, right? So we'll have to see if a Topior gets online quickly or something like that and presents too many stats for the Mage to deal with. But in this present game, looking at Hemlock's Naga DH versus that Druid, and I'm usually looking with Naga DH to win by turn 6.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There is the potential, depending on what things come into hand. Of course, if you're looking for that sharpshooter, you're looking for those kind of combo pieces. If you don't find draw, that's going to super hurt. Right? It's not going to be able to get there all the way, but look at this hand. The momentum's a little bit clunky at this point, but there's the Oscillator for Hemlock to start with. He did find that Sigil to be able to draw, and there is the 1 mana Naga for a pop-off turn. Still, at this point, still only turn 1, but missing some of those pieces. I do kind of like this choice by Hemlock to just go in on the Slither Spear when seeing that that Cactus Construct on the other side. Try to keep the board a little bit, especially against, like you said, the more dragon-based Druid that's going to have a little bit more board presence. And now on the other side, Hemlock can follow up on this turn with a 1-drop and getting a hero power in to just be able to actually clean up the board and actually get to keep both minions instead of throwing out that Oscillator on turn 1, losing it, and really not getting to capitalize on the higher health of the Slither Spear.
We do see Splish Splash Whelp coming into the hand, though, for Levik. Levik with... We've been calling it a fake Reno Druid because while the top end looks like your run-of-the-mill Highlander Druid list, there are 10 duplicates. and that is really on the bottom half of the curve. So, double Nest Matron, double Splish Splash Whelp, which is one of the highest win rate cards in the list. Double Widowbloom Seedsman. So a really big focus on hitting ramp early and having things like Cactus Construct to combat the early aggression out of decks like Demon Hunter and perhaps Paladin as well, given that Levik opted to leave it up. That Cactus Construct, when it rolls something like the Loot Hoarder there, drawing a couple of cards, I think is kind of a stealth power outlier in Druid right now.
Yeah, the one downside that I see in this hand right now for Levik, though, is you can ramp all you want, but if you don't have great things to play, or you don't have a lot of kind of that higher top end follow up, what's
you were saying?
Yeah, well, look, I started that point before he started getting all this draw here, but to your point as well of all of the duplicates, we now see Raystraza and now the Reno picked up. So even though Levik did manage to find that ramp, still has a Seedsman in hand as well to follow up with more ramp. There's these cards in hand are not going to be active. Reno still, without being a board clear or setting the board to just one board slot, still does provide some armor, still does provide a pretty decent hero power for the most part. I think that's probably going to be a better hero power more often than not over this just base hero power that he has. But the Yogg is going to be pretty good. But on the other side, Hemlock has this huge handful of all of these Nagas now and still no sharpshooter. This would be a good turn to at least maybe potentially start going in on that first sharpshooter, going in for that first pop-off.
Yeah, no sharpshooter, no Finley to even, flip the hand with the bottom of the deck to try and look for a sharpshooter. And honestly, I think this is sort of the approach Levik has taken for trying to deal with some of these aggressive decks is, okay, my Reno cards are not turned on, but I played double 3/5 taunts. and just puking stats onto the board is one of the ways that Druid can deal with something like a Naga DH. The big card I think Levik would have liked to have in the early game is the Frost Lotus Seedling to play that for draw and armor. Because what you're really looking to do is draw through your deck, fill up your hand, maybe you still have some duplicates remaining, but you play Fizzle and then Finley. So you fizzle a snapshot of your Highlander payoff cards and all these big top end things. And then when you play Finley, you swap that hand, which you make sure there's no duplicates in the hand, with whatever's remaining of your deck. So any duplicates that you had in your deck go into your hand, all your Highlander stuff is active, and you can play the snapshot to get those things back now into your hand. Was messing around with it. It is clever, but it's also got a little bit of setup and requires having that card draw, which has been a little bit absent until Malagos pick up here.
Speaking of card draw, Hemlock is going full in on that draw with the top deck of the sharpshooter this turn, which is absolutely amazing for him. This deck is sometimes even just called Naga DH. It really leans into the sharpshooter. You want these pop-off turns. And the fact that it's able to continue to draw the cards that it needs to just continue the chain makes it so powerful. Even after the more recent change, the nerf, changing it from 5 health down to 3, we see the power of it here just absolutely going off, that alternating between Naga spell, and drawing into the next one that you need. Now, there still is some Nagas in hand. The second sharpshooter also picked up here, but there kind of was a lot of those low-cost spells and coins and things already used for the first one. The sharpshooter lives!
Okay, it's okay. We got to pounce. It's all right.
That's the power of Yogg. It can give and it can take. There's that Finley that you were mentioning, which is actually a kind of interesting pickup after that Immolate just went off.
I don't think that Immolate is going to be terribly relevant, as the game will be over one way or the other here. But a cute thing you can do with the Finley is go Sharpshooter and, Finley away any Nagas that you would like to draw back into your deck. Don't think that's an issue
Yeah.
in this particular game, but every once in a while, that's something you can do when you've run your deck out of Nagas. You can just throw some back in. Would be a way also of getting rid of the Immolate debuff, but yeah, we're just kind of going in for as much damage as possible here.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense here as well. Discovering another Naga. The school teacher or the Baba Naga are interesting. I think the Baba Naga and the death scale having the ability to actually deal additional damage are very enticing in a deck that already wants to be dealing this damage here. The kind of downside for Hemlock, okay, 6 damage here, but does he actually want to kill off the Yogg? It looks like he really was thinking about it, but does decide to go for the face damage, which honestly I really like. I think that's your game plan anyways. And this sharpshooter on the board that we see Yogg steal was the second sharpshooter as well. So those kind of big swing turn, big payoff turns, not really going to be around now. So Hemlock just pushing that damage face, capitalizing on as much damage as possible, as you mentioned. Plus, there's this momentum in hand, too. So I really respect that, just sending it all face and hoping that he can kind of put together enough damage on the next turn or the next 2 turns, potentially, if it continues to go that long.
And we're seeing now, although Levik discovered this Malagos thinking to, get some draw, 9 health is not where you want to be, and so now it seems like it's going to be perhaps just an inactive Reno for the armor here to try and heal out of range. Of course, had the Reno been active, were this a normal Highlander deck after that previous pop-off turn, could have used it to sort of prevent a follow-up pop-off, since typically the first sharpshooter does draw the second. But Yogg was able to just.
We've already seen both sharpshooters as well, right? So, even still, this is one of those cases where it doesn't actually really matter as much if the Reno is active or not, because in this matchup, you've already seen both sharpshooters. Sure, I guess Hemlock can try to put together some Nagas, put together a couple things, and kind of try to go wide on the board afterwards, and okay, fine, because now, again, you have this extra 5 armor. You've already seen both of those key cards, and how does Hemlock get through this health and the armor, plus potential added armor from, an additional hero power from Reno, or added discovered spells, and as well, picking up that A&R now, Levik can just go ahead and go in on that next turn and use it to heal back up to full. And that's just going to close out the game. Like, Hemlock cannot come back from that.
Yeah, it's really, I think, going to come down to the what does the Finley rule, because there's not presently enough damage, and not enough time at this point. Were it not for the A&R, I think Hemlock would be able to squeak out a win here, since there are no dragon golems for taunts in Levik's list. But getting in that Finley at the end of last turn, finding exactly A&R, there's just no way to get through all that health for a second time.
Yeah. And we see there Hemlock agrees as well, knows that it's over, just going to go ahead and give it up. But that does mean Levik's going to get a point on the board there. He's not getting, he's not going to, get swept here in that first series. So he's on the board, and there is this debate. We're going to hear about it all weekend of this duplicates in these Reno decks. And here was one of those cases for the argument of it doesn't really necessarily matter. And this is the matchup where, okay, sure, it's inactive, fine, I'm still going to do the thing. But I don't think that necessarily the playing the Reno there was 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 the thing that got it. Yogg, I think, was the VIP in that game, and then the follow up pickup of ANR was where it really came down to. The Reno was just kind of a bonus, a stall, one additional turn to get to that ANR.
I do want to highlight, though, Levik's play there of, okay, I want a Reno for the health. Other options could have been, for hero power first, so you're getting an additional armor from the druid hero power, or try and high roll the armor hero power. And he said, okay, I'm gonna play the Reno, didn't get the armor hero power. Well, I'm gonna Finley now, because if you save Finley to try and go the next turn, then you're not gonna have the 10 mana for ANR. So really ends up paying off that sequencing, and the 5 armor was just enough to keep him alive until he could. I was going to say Reno back up, but that's the old Reno effect, is restore your health.
Yes,
the full.
Well, but no Renos in this game, Edelweiss. As we get into game number 3, Levik bringing in his Demon Hunter, and Hemlock switching over to this Rainbow Mage that we did get to highlight a little bit earlier. Some interesting cards and interesting changes for this Rainbow Mage that we've kind of seen in some of these other lists. Again, they're small changes, but they're huge as well, which sounds weird, but if you look back over some of the history of some of these decks, you can see things like tour guides in the 1 mana slot in some of these, or those lightning storms that were talked about with Nature Shaman, just some of these kind of additional minions. But the Salesman just being such a pivotal new card for a lot of these decks, and in this Rainbow Mage, that is going to be one of the cases where once Hemlock finds those, you really kind of do want to save those for a 0 mana additional damage you can send to face once you get on board with Sif. But in the meantime, getting to that point, building up some of these other tools with the keyboard, the follow-up of the cold case, finding tempo with putting things on the board, and just starting to chip away a little bit of that damage. As you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily on the Rainbow Mage about just going in on huge 30 35 damage all in one turn, but getting more of that chip damage in. This might be a matchup where Hemlock can start to do that a little bit, but also on the other side, there is the turns where you can do huge amounts of damage with sharpshooters.
I think it's a little bit more of full defensive mode up in this particular match, since did not have the early Snake Oil Salesman or the Worm to get down. We're just going to be sort of playing stuff to be defensive until this turn 4, which turn 4 is where Mage can have some of its most aggressive plays, just because with keyboard you get a 4/4 as you're doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing anyway. See cold case coming down, and were Hemlock to have like a volume up there, you're getting a 4/4 while you're drawing additional spells. So bit of a slower start than usual, but keyboard really turns things around going into that turn 4.
Yeah, definitely, especially with the cold case in hand as well to follow up. It's such a solid tempo play and defensive play all at the same time. It's just fantastic. On the other side, though, Levik here starting to build some of these pieces. The momentum's being very discounted, being only at 1 because there's been so much draw this turn. But is this a turn where he actually wants to use those? Looks like not. He's actually going to go ahead and clear up the minion on the other side. But I like this choice to just go ahead and use this through Felon Flames for the finale and get another trade. Unfortunately for Levik, that skeleton did just go ahead and finish the minion off after that value trade. But through Felon Flames for me has been one of the really interesting cards in this deck, because again, it's another 0 cost card. I think 0 cost cards and the combination of what you can do with these zero cost cards in a lot of these is a story we've talked about a lot. But through Felon Flames is interesting because you can use it on those pop off turns. You could use it on either maybe a minion that you have played that now you're just going to give rush and trade in to allow some of that sharpshooter damage to go directly into face instead of those keeping things on board. But if you don't play it for the finale effect, you're not getting the buff. And so there's kind of that give and take of sometimes you actually do want to play it for a finale effect to get that buff.
Pick me.
Yeah, I think typically, you play it for the finale when you are trying to push more face damage or get some kind of value trade or something. But very frequently, I find just playing it earlier in the pop-off before your sharpshooter has taken care of all their minions so that you can rush in something and clear more of the board, allows more of the sharpshooter damage to actually go face rather than getting soaked up by the opposing board.
Right.
Levik here, searching for any draw possible, going for the Runic Adornment, hitting Mark of Scorn, but kind of grasping at straws, and this is the one downside to the Naga DH sometimes, is it can be very potent, it can win by turn 6, it can really get under things, but if you don't draw Sharpshooter, you're kind of dead in the water a lot of the time with the current builds.
Yeah, and that last turn was really interesting too with the discover options. There was the potential of just taking the sigil and setting that up to get that additional draw in the next turn, right? Kind of just set that up for the future. Levik opted for going for kind of clearing up the board and getting an additional 1 draw this turn. Unfortunately, didn't draw into any of the additional draw. Right? Sometimes in these decks like this, these kind of OTK big power swing decks, you really want to draw into your additional draw to keep that going in the future turns. Kind of missed on that, but it does dig a little bit deeper. Hopefully you can draw into that. But for Hemlock here, he's just doing his thing. He's got some setup on the other side. He's drawn into these elemental inspirations. And honestly, I think for the mage here as well, to be able to have the time to start building up some of this armor, to be able to build up a board, set up for a bigger health board with those elementals going on curve on 7 against the deck that hasn't killed you yet and it's turn 7, has to feel very good.
Yeah, no fear here from Hemlock. He knows, all right, Sharpshooter's not there. It has to be top decked. Not even going to worry about the 4/4 School Teacher in play, just running out the double Arcane Artificers. Sitting at this high life total and now being able to make a massive board like this, you're feeling pretty confident against Nagadh and Levik. It looks like doesn't even hit the sharpshooter on that Finley, and I don't know that there's really much time left to even make something happen here. Able to get some damage or clear off the 7 power minion to buy another turn, but if a Sif were in hand, you'd be worried about just being dead here.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes when you get these inspirations, you get these elementals, you can just build a board, especially in a matchup like this that really doesn't have an answer for these wide boards. You don't even need Sif. Who even needs it? It's at the bottom of the deck. It's fine. It's always at the bottom of the deck, but you just get to hit them with these big things, these big elementals. And turn after turn now, we have seen Levik just having to try to go for these draws to try to replace the hand, finally finding a sharpshooter. But is it a little too late at this point with all of this damage on the board that just is so likely to soak up a lot of these sharpshooter hits? Yeah,
and just turn 8 is way longer than this deck wants to allow things to go, and elemental inspiration is just far too many stats for an AGDH. So I think you can't feel too bad about that one. You just sort of chalk it up to draw variance and play out the turn just to make sure you get your reps in for next time. But there's I don't think even if every shot had gone face, I don't think it would be enough damage for Levik here.
Yeah. I I don't even think there's anything that he could hope to generate or discover here at this point either. There's really not a lot of discover or generating left in hand anyways at this point. He did have to kind of use a lot of those resources in the first half of the game when he still wasn't finding those sharpshooters. But yeah, we're gonna see it here. As you mentioned, just still not enough. I mean, that's the power of that deck, though, as you see at the very end. Still a huge board that was generated. That was a very, very big turn. But in this situation, it came many turns too late. And especially against the big board that Hemlock was able to put up with all of those elementals, it didn't stand a chance. So at that point, it was by far too late. Turn 8, no. They should have been dead on turn 5 or 6. But now we're going to see Hemlock needing to get a win on this Demon Hunter. And very much like we saw with the Nature Shaman in that first matchup, we're kind of seeing the same thing happen here with this Demon Hunter. Every time it's been on stream so far from either side, it has not managed to get a win.
Yeah, and so whether that is, just the draw variance, or this deck is perhaps not as powerful as it's been hyped up to be, or people have just brought things that seem to work well against it. I mean, the disadvantage to this Naga DH and why it wants to try and win so quickly is because you really rely on your opponent not having that many stats in play, because the fewer stats they have in play, the more likely you are to just go face with the damage from the sharpshooter. And I think that may be part of why, this mage has opted for a build with the elemental inspirations and not the excavates. I'm sure there are other reasons as well, but it certainly is one of the big advantages. You can feel pretty safe running out a bunch of stats from elemental inspiration, rather than the excavate cards, which can be a little clunky, don't have a bunch of stats. They can be a little more aggressive, but you're relying on a little bit of RNG in terms of what things you're going to pull out of the excavates.
Yeah. We're going to see Hemlock have to bring in this third deck. This Demon Hunter is up 2-0 at this point. So again, with Conquest, having to get a win with each deck really needs to solidify. But if for some reason it doesn't go well this game, does have that game number 5 to try to close things out. Levik here bringing in this Plague Excavate Death Knight, which honestly, I kind of like the switch over to this Plague DK here, going into the Demon Hunter. I think putting in a lot of those plagues into the deck, where the deck on the other side wants to kind of turbo draw and is just going to likely draw into a lot of those plagues. Very, very strong. And also I want to mention Hemlock did not have but found that Slither Spear, which was such a good pickup there to just get on board, start applying some of this damage. And this is a pretty early Desperado. Sometimes Desperados can be kind of used in those pop-off turns, but this is really panned out well for Hemlock so far.
Yeah, the plagues can be an annoyance as this Demon Hunter, particularly the Frost Plague, which can mess with your pop-off turns in terms of taxing your mana in the middle of it. But Plague DH can struggle to deal with some of these early boards, so you often are able to get in significant chip damage before your pop-off turn. And Hemlock, like Levik before, no sharpshooter to speak of. So looking like he's just going to continue this push, killing the 4/4, hoping for no Tomb Trader to clear this up, and trying to get as much chip damage as possible so that there's not as much of a need for the big sharpshooter pop-off.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good decision too as well. There definitely could have been an argument there for on turn 3 just going for the Sigil of Time, again, setting up for that draw. But with everything that's going on in the hand, as you mentioned, no Slither Spear, there's really not the kind of tools for creating a
There it
pop-off
is.
turn yet. Finally, but again, where's the rest of it? The sharpshooter is definitely important, but you also need the other things. And the biggest important thing to at least get it started is one of those one-cost Nagas, and there's not one of those in hand. But the way that Hemlock ordered this, these last couple of turns, instead of just going for that draw, setting up the draw for the next turn on turn 3, as you mentioned, went in, killed that Helia, and just kept things on board to continue pushing some of that chip damage. And I think this is also very much against this Plague Decay, what we saw Hemlock do with the Paladin in the first game as well, right? Just kind of get on board and say, okay, this Death Knight doesn't really have a wide board removal except for Tomb Trader.
Right.
And if Levik doesn't have the Tomb Trader, I'm in a very good spot. And as we see, already down to 9 health on Levik's side, and again, kind of a clunky hand on the other side.
Yeah, didn't work with the Paladin as there was the Tomb Trader, but this time, no Tomb Trader, and Sharpshooter not necessary. Just double dispose is going to clean it up here because of all that damage Hemlock was able to get in during the early game. So that is going to wrap up the match. Finally, we get to see the Naga DH win in something not the mirror. And we'll have to keep an eye on the Naga DHs going forward, see if it's another sort of Nature Shaman thing, or if it's just been struggling to get some of the draws starting out. But really, really love Hemlock's play there in just taking the aggressive line, not even needing to combo.
Yeah, I think for the Naga DH, the Sharpshooter, Demon Hunter specifically, one thing that I'm really interested in is the slight difference that we're going to see in some of the lists over the course of Group A and Group B, because a couple of the lists have maybe slightly more draw focused, and a couple of the lists have maybe an additional minion or two. So there is going to be a slight difference in those, and I'm curious to see if that ends up making a difference or if it doesn't. But as you mentioned, Hemlock going to get that third win. I loved the just kind of applying pressure, and just the recognition of needing to push that damage on Hemlock's side. And it got him that very crucial first win in the group series. So that does mean that Hemlock is going to move up in this group bracket. But as we close out, Edelweiss, any final thoughts on the series as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, Hemlock just does it again, has made it into the top cut very consistently in previous events. I think one of the players that Pocket has mentioned being a little afraid of previously in terms of just that crazy consistency. And, some things never change.
Yeah. So what do we have coming up next? We're going to be finding out, and you're going to get to see that Hemlock versus REQVAM winners match. And then later we'll get to that Group A elimination match between Gyu and Levik. They're not out of it yet. It will be a kind of double elimination. But up next, we'll get to see that REQVAM versus Hemlock Group A winners match. And there is still so much more Hearthstone to go this weekend in our top 8 championship. So please don't go anywhere. Make sure that you are sticking around to check out these matches, see how Group A closes out, and we will be back in just a moment.